Okay, let's talk elections, and we're now looking toward May when the most expensive Senate race in history will end in a runoff.
Yeah, let's take a look at the numbers for the Republican primary for U.S. Senate. This was a close one. Look at that. John Cornyn with 41.9, almost 42%. Ken Paxton with 41% essentially of the vote. So extremely tight. You can see the number of votes right there. That runoff again will take place in May.
Associated Press is projecting State Representative James Tallarico has won the Democratic nomination, getting over 50% of the vote there, defeating Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. That was one of the most closely watched primaries in the country. Again, 53 to 46%, as some of those votes are still coming in.
And the majority of the focus, of course, of the Texas primaries has been on that U.S. Senate race.
Yeah, at the same time, the top seats in the state are also up for grabs coming up in November. Governor Abbott and Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick appear to be locked in for their re-election bids coming up in the general election.
On the Democrat side for governor, Gina Hinojosa has 59% of the vote, so she has won the primary there for the gubernatorial race.
Lieutenant Governor, Democratic primary, Vicki Goodwin and Marcos Velez will head to a runoff. As you see those numbers coming up there, that will be the runoff. Courtney Head trails just behind with 20% of the vote in that race. And when it comes to these runoffs, Texas is just one of a handful of states that require a candidate to get more than 50% of the votes in the primary in order to win. If you voted in the primary, you can only vote in runoff elections for the party with which you aligned during the primary. If you didn't vote in the primary, you can still vote in the runoff, though. The runoff will be on May 26th with early voting starting on May 18th.
The Texas Attorney General's race has been a tough campaign on the Republican side to replace Ken Paxton. So here's a look at how everything's shaped up. State Senator Mays Middleton has 39% of the vote, which is pretty shocking to some. Chip Roy with 32% of the vote, so that is very close. Joan Huffman has about 15%. So again, this will also go to a runoff.
The Democratic nomination, Nathan Johnson has got 48% of the vote. Joe Jaworski with 27%, Tony Box with 25%, looking for a runoff there. A few Texas House seats also up for grabs, with Austin area lawmakers seeking higher office. In District 47, Vicki Goodwin vacating her seat in the Texas legislature to run for lieutenant governor in the Democratic primary to replace her. A big win for Pooja Sethi there with 76% of the vote.
And from the smallest to one of the more crowded races, District 49, Gina Hinojosa vacating her seat, of course, to challenge Governor Abbott. So in the Democratic primary to replace her, Garibay has 33% of the vote, and former Austin City Council member Kathy Tovo has 28%. So again, that will also go to a runoff.
As you know, James Tallarico vacating his seat in the state legislature as he's trying to run for the Senate to take John Cornyn's seat in Washington. In the Democratic primary to replace Tallarico in District 50, Samantha Lopez Resendez has won that election, 52% of the vote. Democrats tried to stop a mid-decade redistricting effort. Of course, they were unsuccessful.
Yeah, now we're seeing some of the candidates emerge in those newly drawn districts. So let's take a look. Congressman Michael McCall retiring. So there's a vacancy in Congressional District 10. As you can see, Chris Gober has 51% of the vote, so he'll win this district. Also, a little backstory on him. He's an Austin-based attorney. He's worked closely with Elon Musk. The Texas Tribune has reported that association has really helped him raise a lot of money for that primary.
Congressman Chip Roy making a bid for Texas Attorney General. Many candidates seeking to replace him in Washington in the Republican primary. For Congressional District 21, former Major League Baseball player Mark Teixeira going to get that opportunity, winning this race big, taking 61% of the vote.
Let's take a look at this one now. Congressional District 31, John Carter. You've seen the ads for him. He's the 84-year-old congressman. He had a little bit of a tough fight here, but he ran away with it all in all after the votes came in. Carter has 60% of the vote, so that will not go to a runoff. He takes that one home.
Hold on to your cowboy hats, folks, because Texas just delivered a political plot twist so wild you'd think it was a Netflix season finale. In a deep red district that hasn't sent a Democrat to the State House in over 2 decades, the unthinkable happened. A political earthquake registering a Richter scale shattering 30-point swing just rocked the Lone Star State's foundation. According to certified election results from the Texas Secretary of State, Democrat Todd Taylor remnant didn't just win. They absolutely demolished the Republican incumbent in a race everyone had written off as a guaranteed GOP hold. This wasn't a narrow victory. It was a political annihilation in a place where Democrats were supposed to be an endangered species. So who is Todd Taylor remnant, the person who just pulled off this political heist? They weren't some nationally funded, party-anointed superstar. By all accounts, they were a local force, a community organizer who decided to run a hyper-local, ground-up campaign while the state GOP apparatus was busy looking the other way. The remnant campaign's internal polling, later obtained by several news outlets, showed a focus on kitchen table issues. Property taxes, local school funding, infrastructure, the stuff that actually keeps people up at night, not the culture war circus playing out on cable news. They talked to voters at grocery stores, at high school football games, and in church parking lots. Meanwhile, the Republican incumbent, seemingly believing their own press and the district's historical data, ran what insiders are now calling a ghost campaign, relying on name recognition and party affiliation while barely showing up to campaign. The reaction from the political establishment has been a beautiful mix of sheer panic and utter disbelief. National Republican committees are issuing vague statements about reviewing the data and remaining focused on the broader battle. But the panic is palpable. You can hear it in the carefully measured tones of the talking heads on conservative networks trying to spin this as a local anomaly while their eyes scream, "What the hell just happened?" Meanwhile, Democratic operatives who had zero expectations here are trying and failing to contain their euphoria. A source within the state Democratic Party, speaking on background, told me, "We didn't even have a pollster assigned to this race. We were allocating resources everywhere else. This was 100% a people-powered upset. It's humbling and terrifying at the same time." But let's get into the real tea. How does a district swing 30 points? You don't just flip a few moderate voters. You trigger a mass exodus. Political analysts poring over the precinct-level data are pointing to a perfect storm. So how do you trigger a mass exodus? You don't just annoy people, you break a fundamental promise. And for a significant chunk of lifelong Republicans in this district, the Trump administration's economic policies, particularly the 2017 tax cuts, were that broken promise. The talking point was tax cuts for the middle class. The reality, as they lived it, felt more like a bait and switch. While the corporate rate plummeted permanently, the individual cuts were set to expire. For many small business owners and retirees on fixed incomes, the math never added up to the windfall they were sold. The gaslighting was real, being told the economy was the best ever while watching their local Main Street struggle and their own tax burdens feel increasingly precarious. Enter Michael Remnant. His campaign didn't just criticize, it weaponized that sense of betrayal with surgical precision. While the GOP incumbent was running a generic Trump-light national playbook, Remnant was hyper-local. His messaging wasn't about red versus blue, it was about accountability versus arrogance. He'd stand in a VFW hall and say, "They told you it was a win for the little guy. Did your property taxes go down, or did they just shift the bill?" That direct, almost folksy indictment cut through the partisan noise. He wasn't a Democrat attacking Republicans. He was a neighbor calling out a bad deal. His entire vibe was the political equivalent of a Karen asking to speak to the manager of the GOP and having the receipts. The grassroots strategy was deceptively simple and brutally effective. Forget TV ad buys. Remnant's team ran a digital-to-doorstep operation that mapped voter discontent with census-level detail. They identified 3 key demographics: small business owners over 50, suburban women who had voted Republican since Reagan, and veterans. The message to each was tailored. To the business owners, you were promised a ladder up. They gave you a shovel to dig deeper. To the suburban women, often the household budget managers, they think you won't notice the sunset provisions. Prove them wrong. To the veterans, service means putting country over party. It's time to serve your community again. The magic or the menace, depending on your POV, was in the messengers. Remnant recruited what he called validators, lifelong card-carrying Republicans who were respected in their communities. The local diner owner, the retired high school football coach, the former county GOP chair, these weren't political operatives. They were trusted faces who would host coffee gatherings and simply say, "I've always voted straight ticket R. This time, I can't. Here's why." That peer-to-peer validation was a political sledgehammer. It gave permission for others to break ranks. So the unthinkable happened. A deep red district held by Republicans for decades just flipped. The immediate post-mortem is all about the local mechanics, the validators, the surgical messaging, the turnout machine, but pull the camera back, way back. This isn't just a single election night upset. This is a political earthquake, and the tremors are just starting to radiate across the national map for 2024 and beyond. What you just witnessed in that one district, that's the GOP's worst-case scenario, now road-tested and ready to replicate. Let's talk about the ground zero of American politics, the suburbs. For years, the Republican playbook treated them as a given, a monolith of conservatism, but that's over. The suburban shift we've been tracking, this race just proved it's not a demographic trend, it's a political extinction event. We're talking about college-educated women, professionals, independent voters who used to split tickets. The validator strategy worked because it tapped into a deep, seething frustration that transcends any one issue. It's a vibe. It's the feeling of being gaslit by a party that talks about kitchen table issues, but then nominates candidates obsessed with culture war theatrics. These voters looked at the Republican candidate, saw the chaos, saw the extremism, and said, hard pass. And here's the terrifying part for the GOP. These voters have long memories. They're not coming back for a mea culpa. This realignment is structural. The policy consequences are immediate and brutal. Think about it. Every moderate Republican in a Biden-won district, or even a Trump-won district with suburban pockets, just watched this race with pure terror. They now have a blueprint for their own annihilation. Any vote for a hardline, MAGA-driven policy on abortion, on election certification, on governance by tantrum is now a career-ending move. It's a vote that will be cut into a devastating digital ad, validated by a lifelong Republican from their own community, and served to their constituents with surgical precision. The party's ability to govern, to whip votes for anything remotely controversial, just evaporated. The internal GOP crisis isn't coming, it's here, and it's playing out on two fronts. Front one, the money, big donors, the corporate PACs, they aren't funding a suicide mission. They saw their investment in that red district go up in flames because of candidate quality and message toxicity. Their calculus just changed. Why pour millions into a race where a well-funded, ruthless insurgent campaign can pick off your flawed candidate? The cash is going to start drying up for the most extreme nominees, leaving them stranded and under-resourced. And that brings us to front two, the mindset. This is the real poison pill. The GOP base has been gaslit into believing that any loss is not a reflection of their ideas, but of fraud, of a rigged system, of a candidate not being Trump enough. It's a feedback loop of failure. So what's the POV from the other side of the aisle? Democrats are watching this GOP civil war with a mixture of disbelief and strategic glee. The lesson for them is crystal clear: candidate quality matters, message discipline matters, and exploiting your opponent's weaknesses with brutal efficiency works. They didn't win this race by running a progressive purist. They won by running a relatable, well-vetted candidate who focused laser-like on local issues while letting the national Democratic machine surgically define the Republican as a dangerous extremist. The playbook is now written. But here's the twist and the caution for Democrats. This victory can breed complacency. The danger is in mistaking a Republican meltdown for a permanent Democratic realignment. The voters in that district didn't fall in love with a bold new progressive vision. They ran screaming from a GOP dumpster fire. The coalition that delivered this win is fragile, held together by opposition, not affirmation. The lesson for the left is to govern, to deliver, to show that competence isn't just a contrast, it's a product. So what comes next? The American political landscape isn't just changing, it's fragmenting. We're moving from a two-party system into something messier. On the right, you have the official Republican Party apparatus, now functionally bankrupt of authority, and a populist insurgent movement that values loyalty over electability. They're not partners, they're hostages in a bad marriage, fighting over the last scraps of a dwindling inheritance. The 2024 presidential primary won't be a contest of ideas. It will be a litmus test of fealty, a reality TV show where the prize is the keys to a party that might already be an empty shell. For the country, the immediate future is one of profound instability. A House of Representatives where the majority can't actually govern is a house that lurches from one manufactured crisis to the next. Government shutdowns, debt ceiling, brinksmanship, investigative theater, it's all on the menu. The business of America will not be business. It will be performance. The voters who just rejected chaos in their backyard are about to get a front row seat to it in Washington, D.C., because the forces that created that losing candidate are now in charge of the party. The final analysis is this: American politics has entered its reality TV era for real. The plot lines are outrageous, the characters are flawed, the drama is constant, and the audience is exhausted.